Again, my name is Scott Menciani, and I'm the president of the Whalom Cooperative and the Whalom History Museum. We have Michael Kudermarsh, who's our IT web and curator, and Kimberly Kovac, who does our events.
Can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
Do you have a microphone?
I have. Okay.
The library has.
Kimberly Kovac, who's head of our events, and they'll be joining me doing the presentation. Everybody else, and as most, I don't know if most of you know that Whalom opened in 1893, first trolley park in the country. It was built by the Fitchburg and Leominster Street Railway Company to increase ridership on the weekends. The street railway had Monday through Friday service for people who were going to work or groceries, do normal things like that. But they didn't have, when the weekends hit, they had nothing going for it. So they ended up building a park that was a dance hall, an English-style walking park with gardens, and they had some boats, a boat launch, and fishing, canoeing. They used to do picnics, and as the years went through, they started to add the rides and the other gaming and other facilities. In 1935, Henry Bowen purchased the park, and the Bowen family maintained majority interest until the mid to late 90s. And as we all know, the park closed in 2000, sadly, and we have some of their some items here that we brought from our collection. So today we're gonna go through the history, and we have a little video here for you, and then Mike's gonna take over, and we're gonna give you a little something that not very many people talk about during these presentations, these history presentations of the park.
Sorry if I scared anybody. I get connected. I came with the computer. That was my job. I did my part. So I apologize for all those I jumped. You know, medical is not supplied, it costs extra. But I do thank you all for coming here. I know you could all be at the Octagon Fair looking at the monster truck, so I appreciate you coming to see us instead. We promise to be just as excited. So, Whalom started out as a trolley park that was brought up, and eventually as it grew, it went from just being botanical gardens and animals and some swimming to actually starting to be more of an amusement park that we're more familiar with rides and attractions. The most notable attraction of any park is the roller coasters. And Whalom throughout the years had 4. They only had one time, they only had up to 2 at a time. They ended up taking them out or they lost them and they swapped them out. The first coaster they ever had was literally just called roller coaster. I know, very great. It operated from 1901 to 1924. And Frederick Ingersoll was the builder and designer. It was a side friction figure 8 roller coaster. Now what a slide friction was is the original coasters that came out all kind of operated like jumping in an American Flyer sled and going down a hill. It had wheels, it rolled, that was about it. It went down a hill, up a hill, and there was wheels at the top. And there was a slight wheel on the side just so it wouldn't grind too much, and that was it. So it had to go down and then come up and slow down enough because if you're going too fast, the car would just keep going. So they were very mild coasters. There's actually only one of these still operating in the world, and that's down in Pennsylvania. And Whalom had one of these, but a lot of parks also had these. Moving forward, technology advanced. They added what's called an upstop wheel. That was a third wheel that went underneath the track so that the trains could go much faster, and when you get to that top of the hill, it could be going fast because that other wheel would catch up. So the train would stop, you wouldn't, you'd get that big airtime feel when your body felt like it was either coming off the seat or actually did come off the seat, which some of us love, some of us absolutely despise, and will never ride it again. So their second coaster was a shooting star. This coaster basically operated from 25 to 38, and if you noticed, it actually used the whole back side of the park. It used up a lot of space. It was an out and back style with a lot of hills. This would have been similar in feel to things like the Yankee Cannonball, the Mountain Park Flyer down in Holyoke. Even maybe you would feel a little bit like the, not the Cyclone, but the coaster at Palisades. It was also an out and back style park. But it was all about hills, back and forth with a slight turn and back. The coaster was actually destroyed by a hurricane. So they lost this due to a natural occurrence. They don't know the actual builder, but most likely it was PTC because they were the top builder of roller coasters at the time. And there's no records of it being built by their second biggest competitor, which was Trevor Engineering, that built the Cyclone up at Revere Beach. And so he was building stuff at the time. But there's no record of him building this particular one. And because the layout is a little more about hills and fewer turns, it's most likely PTC, because that was very common that we want to get it there. We want them to feel that up and down feeling. And then, like I said, it was an out and back style, so basically it went out, turned around, came all the way back. Sorry, Scott asked me to let everybody know what PTC stands for. PTC is the Philadelphia Toboggan Company. The Philadelphia Toboggan Company was a major builder from the 1920s on to like the 1950s. They actually still make trains. So these days they rehab and make new trains. They stopped building roller coasters, but they also were most likely the builders of the dance halls, some of them possibly the skating rink pavilion. They did the skating rink and dance hall at Canopy. The Cuddle Up, the Crazy Cups at Canopy, they built the style ride, which we see around New England at Storyland Canopy. And it's very likely that they built the Funhouse as well, because it was within the style of their layout. Later on, they decided to build a nice little kiddie coaster. This one was made out of steel. This was the only steel coaster they ever had inside the park. It operated sometime in the 70s into about the 90s. It was in the very back part of the park where Kittyland was towards the end of the park's operation. It was just an oval style with the same structure, but one of the cool things about it is it was built by the Overland Amusement Company. They did not build a lot of coasters, but one of the things they did build, and unfortunately we do not have a photo of it, they built the fire truck that Whalom used to have. And that was one of the main things. They didn't do a lot of coasters, they built a lot of those fire trucks that do those fire truck rides that go around the parks. So they actually had 2 rides from that company available in the park. Now I gotta go the big one. Flyer Company. This is the one everybody remembers because we all grew up with this one. Or at some point rode this one. And probably got scared by this one because the station shook and you could hear it from 3 miles away. And everybody thought it was an earthquake, but no, the park was just open. But this was operated from the 1940 all the way to 2000. Then unfortunately it then stood SPNO for a while, standing but not operating until it was ultimately torn down. It was designed by Vernon Keenan. He did not design a lot of coasters, but the ones he did are extremely well known. By the time that Whalom's closed, there was only one other Vernon Keenan designed coaster still in operation, and that was the Coney Island Cyclone. He is very renowned for the designs he did. He was a very good designer, and if anybody rode this and wasn't scared off by all the shaking and the layout, it was a very well designed figure eight. I know a lot of people refuse to ride it. The figure eight style, what that meant is basically it crisscrossed itself. So instead of being long, like the shooting star, or like Yankee Cannonball that still operates today, it basically would go up, turn, and go through itself over and over again. And if you actually were to look at this from the sky, it looked like an egg. So it would go over itself over and over again. One of the nice things about this design, though, is you had that really long outside drop. So unlike a lot of figure eights that cut into the middle first, Vernon Keenan decided to take that first drop and keep it on the outside. So you had a really big, long, straight drop, more reminiscent of a standard roller coaster. You picked up a lot of speed, a big thrill drop right at the beginning. It was 2,640 feet long. It was 70 feet high, and it was at the speed of 35 miles per hour, and lasted for just under 2 minutes. But if you were scared of this thing, it probably felt a lot more. So the next slide, I believe, is a video, so it might get a little loud. So how many people recognize the song? Peggy O'Neill, you got it. I know that my grandfather was a member of our harmonica group, and they played that all the time. So when I found that, I'm like, I gotta put that on for my grandfather. So we wanted to move on from the roller coasters to the rides. And Whalom Park was not a large park. It was only about 33 acres total. And that was including the parking lot, the picnic rows, the skating rink, and all the spots that were just trees around the park, the the beach across the street, so it's not a very large park, but in that park, they tried to offer a lot of rides, and they got switched off, so we want to talk a little bit more about that. You can see a few things here, like the Turnpike, the Roto Jets, flying scooters, and the Scrambler. So, probably the most notable of the unique rides was the Whalom Park Carousel, which was built by Charles Luth. If you look at this one, we know some of the characters are not Charles Luth. This was when they put it back together. If you remember before the park closed, they actually auctioned off the carousel, but then they opened it back up. They got back some of them by donation, and then they got donations from other carousel manufacturers to fill in the entire menagerie, so it could open back up. And the original one was assembled in 1909, and then brought the Whalom in 1912. It was a 50-foot platform that was ranged 3 abreast. The menagerie fitted 56 animals and 2 chariots. They had 35 jumping horses and 1 goat. I know, who would have thought a goat would jump? Standing, it offered 4 horses, 2 sea monsters, like the one you see in the photo here, 4 greyhounds, 2 camels, 5 giraffes, and 2 more goats, as well as the very decorative chariots that were offered on the carousel. The Pirate's Den. Not a lot is known about the Pirate's Den because there wasn't a lot written down, not a lot of stories that were written before it was burned down by fire. There was things going on, and some dirty racks had gotten a spark against them and burned the whole thing down. I can tell you by this photo is actually one my grandparents took. That's my aunt and my other aunt in the car there. I can tell you by the style that this was a not PTC, but a Hersing style car. And basically it featured 2 stories, the 2 balconies, and I know there's a drop because my mom always talked about how the drop scared her. The Tumble Bug is probably one of the best known of the classic rides at the park. It was extremely rare. Nowadays there are actually more kiddie tumble bugs operating than there were adult tumble bugs operating 30 years ago. There's a ton of the kiddie ones operating. In fact, right now there are only like 1 operating the entire world. Everybody else either put them into storage or stopped operating them. At the time the park shut down, there were about 5 in operation, including winners. It was built by Trevor Engineering. It was just a very simple setup of a handful of cars that went around. It was either a tub like Whalom had, or in some cases there were themed turtles, which is actually the theme of the current one at Kennywood that's operating today. And it was a nice, joyful ride of mild hills up and down, and it has a good force, although I'll admit I did think I was going to fall off the first time I rode it. It kept going around the hill and sliding towards the door. The Turnpike was one of the other well-known rides at the park. It was originally installed with these 3-cone cars that had a bumper on the outside, so if you went too far to the left or too far to the right, it would correct your steering and keep you on the track. Later on, as those wore down, they basically kept the same layout, but replaced the entire ride with 2 the go-karts, which operated from sometime in the 90s till the park closed in 2000. I was able to ride both the street go-karts and the Honda ones. I'll admit by the time I was about 13, the Hondas were a little more exciting, but I did miss the old cars. The Fun House was another big attraction at the park. I'm sure we've all been there. I haven't managed to go on that. I regretfully did not get to go on it at the time when they used to have things like the turntable, which my mom always talked about how fun it was. I did, however, get to do the barrel and get yelled at for trying to do somersaults, but it was originally just a fun house. But for a while in the 80s, it was known as the Fun Place. And then in 1996, the park rethemed the entire attraction to the Monster Motel, and then operated that until 2000. That was I knew I was missing a 0 somewhere. I kept going back to missing it. I couldn't find it. So there's a 0 I'm missing. So just pretend there's an extra 0, and then it did not close down 1,800 years before it did. So, that's the laughing salad on the front. Most people know that and probably kept them out of the ride to start with. And that's actually one of the